What are the things that I can make an agreement with myself that I will actually do? Newsflash, 11,000 people watch this channel, but only 10% are actual subscribers. Before we get to the recording, I want to come to you with a direct call to action. I want you to subscribe. We have some things cooked up that are bigger guests, bigger production value, different series that we can only do with the support from people like you. If you like what we're doing, click the subscribe button so that we can give you the information, the content that you deserve. Go ahead and click the subscribe button. Awesome. Thank you so much. Do you remember the first time you had a freak out moment? Do you remember the most recent time that you couldn't handle the situation that you found yourself in? As a coach, you could be doing all the right things. You could be coaching movement. You could be coaching the particular performance that your client or athlete wants to pursue, nutrition, sleep, their social relationships. You could be coaching all of that, but if you miss this, there's a chance that they're not going to perform to the best of their ability. What we're talking about is mindset. What we're really talking about is not freaking out. How to keep your cool despite putting yourself in really uncomfortable situations. If you zoom out and you think about an epidemic that is capturing all of us, it's the inability to handle stress as it's happening to us. Now, the secrets to handling stress are, one, learning how to anticipate it, learning what you need to do ahead of time so that when you're in the moment, you'll know how to perform. But then despite the best intentions, things are still going to happen. None of us are exonerated from pain. None of us are going to have this beautiful storybook ending to the things that we want to pursue if there's enough intention and enough aspiration. And so you need to know what to do in the moment when things don't go exactly like you want. My name's Spencer Nix. This is a channel devoted to the art of radical health and athlete design, where we break down very simple tools that you can apply for yourself and those that you're coaching. And today we're going to get into this concept of mindset. Probably helps to start with a salient definition. There's lots of ways that you could find this. For me, I think of it simply as the words and the stories that are constantly flowing through your head as you're doing whatever it is that you're doing. Now, you're probably not going to find that in the, American Psychological Association's textbook. But to me, that feels like a very simple working definition because it breaks down exactly what you need to focus on, which is what is the script that's playing in your head at all points in time. Now, before we get into the specific tools, I want to let you know that this is something that isn't just an abstract concept to me. If I had to be really honest and transparent with you, the viewer, about what I as an athlete, as a human being, have struggled with, it's this. It's getting overwhelmed in the moment. It's having these preconceived notions of what I should be experiencing, and then it being something drastically different as reality unfolds. As well, I'd say, and it's probably a topic for another episode, are the sometimes less than healthy ways that I would decompress because what just happened to me that I didn't think I deserved needs to be self-medicated, self-soothed. And I think that if you can go back to the beginning, go back to the start of what you really thought was supposed to happen and be a little more realistic, then this chain of events, this sequence can go a lot better for you. Now, because I work in a performance center, the reason that this topic was brought up was on specific performance. We have everyday clients that aren't training for something in particular, but quite often we have guys and girls that come in and they have a specific event. They have a specific sport that they want to not only participate in, but they want to thrive in. As we said previously, you can have all the nuts and bolts of performance in place, but if you haven't thought through this, it's a crapshoot on what the outcome is going to look like. And so these three tools are tools that if you're a coach, you can immediately use. You don't have to be a sports psychologist. Why do I say that? Well, because all you're going to be doing is really asking questions. You're not going to paint yourself as an expert. And a great thing to remember is that the person that's going to be doing the performance, they're the expert of their own life. And so they need to come up with the answers to these questions that you'll simply ask and you'll simply guide them through. I have cute little names for these, and I want to be honest that I didn't make any of this stuff up. But after 20 years of studying this, these are three very, very applicable tools that I'm super thankful for the guys that will give credit to. The first, and this is before we even get to the actual competition, the actual event, and we could interchange that with a challenging work environment. We could interchange that with something that's happening at home. But let's say there's a specific event that we want to prepare for. In the context of sport, we know all the details of that. If this is a fencing tournament, we know how long a bout is. We know what it takes to be a winner, a loser. If this is jiu-jitsu, we know how long the bout is. We know what it takes to be a winner and a loser. And so the way that we'll describe this is the difference between expectations and an agreement. Now, the inventor of that phrase is a fellow named Steve Chandler. He's a life and performance coach that's been around for a long, long time. And so I want to break down the difference of those two terms. When we say expectations, and when we break down what's behind expectations, a lot of times it's fear. There's a fear that we're not going to perform as well as we could, and so the expectations that we set for ourselves are as high as they possibly could be. What do you want from this tournament that you're about to enter into? Well, nothing will satisfy me except for winning, which means you're focused on the outcome, and quite honestly, anything short of absolute perfection is going to be a disappointment. Again, I think that we do that because a lack of experience, pressure that we put on ourselves, and maybe not thinking through all the way what it really means to have a successful experience. Now, the difference between, at least internally, expectations and an agreement, and his agreement is focused more on what are the things leading up to this event that are within my control. What are the things that I can make an agreement with myself that I will actually do? Now, we'll get to the specific event and the competition here in just a sec, but you can think of this as 3 different phases. This first one, which we'll call expectations versus agreement, this is really putting lots of the focus on the preparation phase. What are all the things that you and I can sit down and agree upon that you will do, and what are the specifics that we'll agree that you will do within each one of those? For any sport, there's a finite amount of time that we can spend to train. Let's determine what that is. For each thing that we're training for, there's an amount of time that we would think is optimal sleep, an amount of food that we would say is the optimal quantity of food that you need to consume in order to recover and to perform at your best. There's skill for the sport that you'll have to practice. What's the amount of time that we're going to devote to that practice? Within that practice, what are the things that we really need to focus on? Where do we find that we're really good? Where do we find that we need the most attention? Let's agree that we'll do all of those things to the best of our ability with the other constraints that we have in our life, and then move on. Expectations are saying that nothing's ever going to be good enough. I can't do enough training. I can't do enough sleep. I can't do enough nutrition. I can't do enough of this stuff. And so we're constantly feeling disappointment in the whole process. You can see somebody who's walking this out as they're training, not even performing, as they're just practicing. You'll see them get so worked up. And when we see that, it's a red flag that they haven't really thought through what it is that they're expecting of themselves in that moment. What realistically should they be able to do? And so this is a very simple conversation where you ask those questions. Hey, what do you think we should really agree to with me as the coach that's going to be responsible for this small pocket of activities, and then you, the athlete that is going to actually execute these things? What do you think is realistic? And they'll have an answer. Have them write it out. So that's expectations versus agreement, and it's really the anticipation of the thing that is going to be challenging. Now, number 2, I call it script writing. Now, who gets credit for this? I mean, probably Joseph Campbell. But when you think about any script or any story, there's intention, right? There's a hero, there's a character, and there's something that the character wants, but there's an obstacle to overcome. Now, let's talk about the obstacle. The obstacle, if we're watching a great movie, if we're reading a great novel, it can't be something that's so insurmountable that the hero doesn't feel like they have any type of chance of being successful. If it's some story about overcoming a villain, like that villain's got to have some defects. There's got to be some things that we feel like there's a glimmer of hope that they can somehow morph into this new version of themselves to overcome the obstacle. But on the flip side of that, it's not much of a story if there's no opposition at all. In fact, it's pretty boring if we were to say, hey, this person trained for this, it was super easy, and they won the gold medal. So what script writing implies is that you'll sit down with your client, or if you're doing this yourself, you'll sit down and you'll write out the story of you competing. Now, not just think it. The brain has this amazing ability to hold simultaneous projections at the exact same time. So if you're just thinking this, if you go through the classic visualization protocol that sports psychologists have been talking about for a while, even as you're saying these things out loud, your brain can also consider some other possibilities. So as you write this out, you want to make it a script. You don't want to pretend like you're Pollyanna and you go through the tournament without, a single point being scored on you. You want to consider what the real opposition would look like. In the agreements versus expectation context, you want to figure out what you're really in control of. You're not in control of how the other person is going to respond. You're not in control of what the timing of the event looks like, if they're on time, if they're running behind. So as you're writing this story out, you're writing what your warm-up looks like. You're writing what a realistic outcome of these matches or events or competition looks like, with some realistic opposition. Not too much. You don't write the story that it was overwhelming and you drowned and you couldn't keep going, but you also don't write out, I was swimming and there was no effort at all. It was like I was just floating above the water. No, you say, hey, I got in the water. It was chilly. I took 2 or 3 breaths. I started my stroke and it was hard. I gave myself some time to adjust. A few minutes in, I felt me getting into a groove. About halfway through, I took a break. I took some breaths. I told myself I could do it, and then I kept going. You're going to have your client write that story out from start to finish of the thing that they are pursuing in a realistic version. The next thing you're going to have them do is you're going to have them read it out loud. Don't give them a heads up of that. Giving them a heads up is going to have them curate and craft that to where it's not so embarrassing. Just have them write it, and then unexpectedly let them read it out loud. As they're going through this a second time, as they're watching this script and this screenplay unfold, they're going to have some thoughts. They're potentially going to have some emotions. You're going to ask that question after they read it. Hey, after you read that out loud, what came up for you? After you pictured this going down, is there anything you'd want to change? It's okay for you to go in there and start to edit it like a high school English teacher. It's okay for you to start to craft that script to be the most realistic version of what it is that they're about to do. Have them do that as many times as it takes until they arrive at a paragraph where you say, how do you feel about that? And they say, I feel good. And you're done. Now, I'm indebted to 2 gentlemen for that process of expressing and then recalling. One is a psychology professor at UT named James Pennebecker, who is credited with the concepts of expressive writing. Now, that was originally appropriated for working through trauma, meaning looking back at your past and trying to separate yourself from the physiological experiences that you had. But using the guidance of Mark England and the Lifted method, this concept can be used and reused for things that have yet to happen to you in a way that I think is much more powerful and potent and clarifying than just thinking something in your head or just saying it out loud to an active listener. So that's what we call script writing. And then last is what we're going to call going from oh shit to okay. Now, pardon my French there, but that's a reference to a guy named Mark Goulston, who wrote a book called Just Listen. It's a book that came out several years ago, But it's a process that you'll want to go through when things don't go exactly as planned. Now, you've made an agreement with yourself on how to prepare, the things that you'll be responsible for, the things that are within your control. You've thought through exactly how you want this to go down. You've been realistic about that process. You've considered the opposition, you've considered your responses, and you can see with great clarity the ideal version of how you want this to go down. Yet, you're not exonerated from pain, and you can't control everything. That means that it's a wonderful thing to recognize that at some point, something's going to happen that's unexpected. Now, a lot of people do all of this stuff that we talked about, but they don't consider the possibility that something's going to go wrong. They don't consider the possibility that something's going to happen that they don't like. Now, if you forgot everything I just said, this one tool as a tool to help you manage and handle stressful situations that happen in your life, I find to be incredibly effective. Going from oh shit to okay is a process of, at first, recognizing what's going on, recognizing and allow yourself to feel the fact that something has hit the fan. You know what I'm talking about? The very next step is to just acknowledge the release. Now, there's a gentleman by the name of Jack Fillman who has a great physiological exercise you can go through. It's called a psychological sigh. So step one, something happened and you don't like that it happened. Feel what you want to feel. Step two, release that feeling. You'll take 2 very rapid inhalations through your nose and then 1 very slow and as long as you can in the moment, exhalation through your mouth. If you've ever seen a dog right before they go to sleep, this is exactly what they do. This is designed to take whatever it is that you're experiencing and to try to relax you. Now, a sympathetic nervous response, as we all know, traps our breath in our chest, and it then sends this weird signal to your brain to start to think things that may or may not be true. Feel what you need to feel, start to release some of the pressure, and then make a distinction between the feelings that you're feeling and the thoughts that are going through your head. Feelings are cool to feel. Your brain, though, is going through an emergency response where it's potentially saying a lot of things to you that aren't actually true. So in other words, it's okay to feel what you want to feel, but it's not okay to say whatever you want. Now, the next step in this process, after you've felt what you need to feel, after you've taken a couple of deep breaths, is to do very similar to what we talked about in agreements versus expectations. It's to recenter yourself into what you can actually control. This process goes like this. Shit. All right. This just happened. I can't control this, and this, but I can put my attention on fill in the blank. That selective attention is what we call compartmentalization. It doesn't mean that you're avoiding. It just means that you're diverting your attention to one thing in particular that you do have control over. In the example of somebody who is in the midst of an ultra marathon, you might have a complete blowout in one of your feet. You take your shoes off at one of the mile markers and you see that you have blisters all over your foot. That's an oh shit moment. Now, some people will take that and get even more worked up. That didn't go according to plan. That wasn't in the script that I wrote out. But if you've gone through this protocol, if you know the steps to take, the very next thing you'll do is take a deep breath, take 2, take as many as you need, let yourself feel what you need to feel, but then decide what it is that you do have control over. What can you do in that moment? Is there a way that you can bandage up your foot? Is there a way that you can keep going? Is there a way that you can selectively put attention to different parts of your body and allow that injury, that perturbation to continue without as much attention and focus on it? Once you've figured out the thing that you want to focus on, once you've reconciled that, hey, there's some things that are outside of your control, it's now time to re-engage. This is going from a very strong sympathetic nervous response to getting to a point where you say, okay, this is the point in time where you're ready to use the right words accompanied by the emotions that you're feeling with the area that you'll focus on and continue to the best of your ability. Now, here's the cool thing about doing ambitious stuff. Here's the cool thing about setting these agreements with yourself and doing something that is more or less ambitious. Things often go wrong, but some of the best stories come from not even some easy opposition that somebody was able to overcome, but when everything went wrong. When everything went wrong. I have a love for riding bikes and recently have participated in a bunch of cross-country mountain bike races. Some have gone really well. Those aren't great stories. Some have gone really poorly. The best story I have to tell you is where my tire completely blew out. It was an oh shit moment. I was in Bentonville, Arkansas. Now, a lot of these courses are in the middle of nowhere. This one, however, is in the middle of the city, and there's these beautiful green belts, and you're in between Bella Vista and Bentonville. And I had this blowout, and I thought, man, I'm done. But I called a friend. He directed me back to the road. I called an Uber. I took it to a tire shop that was pretty dang close to this event that I was doing. I had him fix the tire, and I went back out and finished this race that took me 9 hours. Now, when I crossed the finish line, I had one of the worst finish times. I had to let him know, like, hey, I actually got some assistance, and I know that's against the rules. And so I didn't even officially finish this race. But of all the stuff that I've done, it's the thing that I was the most proud of. It was the thing looking back where everything went wrong, relatively speaking. But I was able to go through that process of recentering, reengaging, and it is a great story. And for my own little family, it's, I think, way more impactful to my kids than the times they see me race and everything went smoothly, everything went according to plan. So these 3 tools, determining the difference between expectations and agreements, script writing, and going from oh shit to okay. These are 3 things that I would recommend that you do every time that you set something that's ambitious. Every time you're working with a client and you guys have determined, hey, this is the thing that we're going to train for, at some point, sit down with them and say, hey, what do you really think's within your control? What are some things that we can agree to that you'll do that you feel like are really realistic? All right, this thing's coming up. What do you think that's going to look like when you're actually doing it? Write that out. Hey, read it to me. What things came up when you read it? What can you do about that? And now let's consider disaster relief. Let's consider our emergency protocol. What's going to happen if something unexpected goes down? How are you going to work through that mentally? What are you going to do to try to have the best possible outcome despite these things that are out of your control? I'm Spencer Nix. This is the Behavior and Performance Research Podcast. Thanks for listening.
Subscribe!